This is Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. Several countries in Europe are slipping into lockdown again. The United States and the United Kingdom are now administering booster shots for their adult population. Does India be needing to look at this again, or are we making the same fatal flaw of becoming complacent as COVID numbers fall to multi-month lows? That's our big story on the program today. Let's take a look at these key developments. For the moment, at least, the government and the Indian Council for Medical Research is saying that there is no scientific basis for Indians needing booster shots. Now, is that really the case? The fact is that globally, countries who do have a surplus supply of vaccines are going forward with administering their adult population with booster shots, and countries like Austria have gone back into lockdown. There is also a spike in cases like in countries like Germany. Is India becoming complacent again? Remember, the second wave hit us as hard as it did because we fell back on what we believed was our natural immunity or herd immunity. That is to say that enough Indians were already exposed to the virus, thereby offering us some sort of exceptionalism. Is it time to lift the exceptionalism argument, throw it to one side and ask, are we making a mistake by not considering booster shots? There are, of course, several questions of equity and morality also at the heart of this conversation, and not medical need alone. Let's take that question to our panel. We're joined by Dr. Brian Wahl, who's an epidemiologist and a public policy expert. We're joined also by Dr. Rajesh Parikh, who's a director at the Jaslok Hospital and author of a very critical book on COVID. We're joined by Dr. Vineeta Bal, one of our country's best-known immunologists and scientists, and Dr. Chandrakant, Lahariya, one of our foremost epidemiologists and public health experts, is on the program with us. Let me start with you, Vineeta. The fact is that we are seeing the sort of good news feeling around vaccinations evaporate in several parts of the Western world, at least, where countries like the US and UK are going for booster shots and other countries have gone back into lockdown. This is terrible news for an integrated world that was looking to get back on its feet. That we have summarily ruled out booster shots. Is that again based on science, or is it because as a country we can't afford them right
now? I will have two ways of two parts to answer your question. That one thing is true, that we do not have any evidence, scientific evidence from India, which will tell us whether we need boosters or we do not need boosters.
Why does the evidence need to be from India? I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. The evidence is globally there that booster shots have efficacy.
I will tell you another paper, another letter correspondence, which has been published in New England Journal of Medicine earlier this week. And that says that people who have had mRNA vaccines, so comparison between 2 mRNA vaccines and 1 adeno-based vaccine, Johnson, Janssen, it's a small report. But it is a report which actually very clearly says that mRNA-based vaccines produce humongous antibodies in the beginning. At the end of 6 months, there is a significant drop. At the end of 8 months, there is even further drop. So that makes people susceptible to infections, is what I am saying. And in contrast, the adeno-based vaccine, which is what they compared it with, it does not produce as high antibodies or as the mRNA vaccines, but the antibodies are persisting from on day 6th month, 8th month, and so also T cell responses. These are very, very clear data. I understand that they are small samples, but the reason why I'm saying that we in India do not really need boosters is for 2 reasons. One is because of this small scale data, and that's why I said that I have no idea how Covaxin fares in it, and these are the only 2 vaccines. One is Covishield. So I'm extrapolating that information from Johnson because it is an adeno-based vaccine. And Covaxin, we have absolutely no data. But if the antibodies and the T cell responses are persisting at least for 8 months based on that small survey, in India, we are just about on a large scale trial. We started vaccinating in January. So this is 8th month, 9th month, 10th month. So we are really at that level what the data shows. So I am willing to take that as a gamble, and then I will bring in the public health perspective to this, so that we should not, I mean, in India, everybody who is eligible should be getting second dose, first dose also, of course.
Yeah.
Slowly and steadily, children below 18 should also be getting the doses. Whether we have doses or not is another matter.
So
But
hold on.
yeah,
You've said a whole bunch of different things, and there are also other studies like the ones we just showed, the Harvard study that does argue in favor of a third dose. Now, what you're saying is very important. You're saying that actually the mRNA vaccines, which is Pfizer and Moderna, produce a higher number of antibodies, so therefore are arguably sort of more efficacious in the beginning, but also drop quicker. Whereas Indians who have mostly been administered with Covishield don't have that drop down. Now we are approaching that drop down phase. Most of us got this vaccine, about 6 to 8 months ago.
No, most of us did not. Most of us did not.
Indians.
We started in January. We started in January.
Got it in March or April, yes.
So April, May, June onwards is when the supplies became somewhat reliable, and then the mass scale vaccination started. So if we are talking about April, May, June, 8 months are certainly not over. So I'm not saying we do not ever need a boost. We will need a boost. But at the same time, I do feel that completing the remaining population for vaccination for a variety of reasons, and that we have discussed ad nauseum, we have multiple reasons why we do not manage to do complete vaccination. But that vaccination with just 2 doses is a priority in my mind, no doubt. But beyond that, giving a third dose is something that is, I would say, cost benefit analysis from Indian perspective as well as from global. And in the global, I'm looking at the global south rather than global north. Global north has everything that they want, and they will take the booster doses. But global south is what we need to worry about.
I take your point. I still do want to separate the equity arguments from the medical arguments, because when we confuse both, then we can't actually argue on science alone. So for just the first part of this program, I want to argue on the science alone. The ethics of I take, and I'm going to put it aside, not because it's less important, because I don't want to discuss both things together. Dr. Parikh, Vineeta cites, a study that seems to show that the vaccines that most Indians have got, the science nudges us in a different direction. Then we are looking at this Harvard study that presumably is about the mRNA vaccines. Do you think that there is a distinction that we must apply on boosters depending on the kind of vaccine?
Well, I certainly agree with 2 very important points that Vineeta has made, and I'm glad she made them right at the outset. Yet, in agreeing with these points, the conclusion I draw from that is that considerable variance from what she has drawn. The most important thing she has highlighted is that all vaccines are not equal. We've grown used to the idea of looking at all vaccines as though they were homogeneous. There's a large amount of discussion across the world that you need 60% efficacy in the vaccines for them to be effective. But I think what she has pointed out appropriately, I might add, is that the vaccines are different. They are constructed on different platforms. They have different vectors, and therefore they behave differently. Now, because it is so early in the vaccine game, we're just beginning to understand that. And I'm so glad that she pointed that out in the beginning. What she also said is that there is no evidence as yet to show that Indians need vaccine. And to that extent, she's right, because there are not enough studies done over there. But I think the corollary to that she has made may not necessarily be right. And the ICMR has actually taken that position in the past. For example, there was no evidence to say that Indians would be affected by COVID-19. The ICMR did at one point take the position that there was no evidence to suggest that testing was necessary in India. Now, if we take decisions based on this, which means we are waiting for accidents to occur and then say that, yes, now that the evidence is there, we will look at it the other way. The ICMR has done that on multiple occasions in the past. I don't want to get into that recent history, but it's almost predictable that they've had to change their position based on there not being any evidence.
So you're saying we're making the same, potentially, Rajesh, making the same mistakes that we've made fatally, at least in the context of the second wave.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just look at the history. This is not going to come to India. It's not going to affect us. We don't need to do testing the way the Europeans do, even though the WHO chief at that point asked for it to be done. We've conquered the first wave. We've taught the world a thing or two about how to deal with this. And all of that, while being based on the fact that there was no evidence to the contrary, turned out to be incorrect. So, as the cliche goes, I mean, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So I agree with what Vineeta says. And I do suspect that in the second half of your show, Vineeta's argument of the ethics of it is going to be more compelling. But my guess right now is, and I'm second guessing her, of course, is that the morality and the ethics of it at least seems to be overriding.
And the science of it, worries you, or you feel that we need to be talking boosters because?
It doesn't worry me. By the way, I took my booster 10 days ago, so I might as well declare my conflict of interest.
Sure.
Why does it bother me? Because there are enough Indians, particularly healthcare workers, who are eligible for boosters. I remember they got both their doses a little earlier than others. They were in the priority group. And some of us are in that priority group who availed of that benefit of our second dose. And these people continue to be exposed to the risk. So to deny them a booster which is due for them and which is proven to be effective all over the world, as illustrated by the study that you cited in the beginning of the program, to my mind just doesn't gel right.
Okay, so at least boosters for health workers and frontline workers. I'll take that back to Vineeta in a moment from now. Chandrakant, go ahead. And as I said, let's put the public health equity principle, which is a very important one, to one side. When we look at whether we are in danger of the immunity of both of these shots waning, and thereby leading to more cases, thereby leading to a possible new mutant. We know the science of this by now. Chandrakant, go ahead.
So this is a respiratory virus, an illness, and all such respiratory illnesses require vaccines against such illnesses require booster in long term. The key question is that whether we need booster now, and the answer is no. But of course, in the long run, a booster dose will be required. But let's go back to another dimension. What we are saying that what is the purpose of vaccination or COVID-19 vaccines? We know from the very beginning that COVID-19 vaccines prevent from severe illness, hospitalization, and death. Now, the studies which you have cited and which are being widely quoted, that the antibodies decline over a period of time. So this is not new for these vaccines, or this is true for all the vaccines. It's immunologically true that with period of time, antibody level in individual will decline, and this is happening with these vaccines also. But the same studies also highlight that though antibody decline, and this is true for all the currently available vaccines which have been studied, but the protection or effectiveness against the severe disease, hospitalization, and death remain unchanged. So the point is, while antibody level are going down, but the purpose which was set up for these vaccines stay the same. The protection effectiveness is not declining. So what is the purpose of giving booster if the protection against the original target is not declined, or original objective has not reduced? So unless we change the objective of COVID-19 vaccination, there is no need of booster. The vaccines are working with the original purpose. That's the one part. Second part is, we need to remember that we are hearing, and everybody love to say this thing, that this is a pandemic of unvaccinated people. Now, if this is a pandemic of unvaccinated people, then why we are focusing on vaccinated people who have received their primary schedule? So that's very hypocritical in my opinion. Third, and there are many dimensions, third part is what we need to remember that the vaccination schedule or whether booster dose should be given is not determined by science alone. It's a vaccination program are operational reality. They are delivered based upon epidemiological factors, scientific factors, and also evidence such as we do not know how best the booster shot works, especially the one used in India. So there are other things. Now coming to the last part.
Yeah.
We are hearing a lot of argument that health workers, because they received vaccine long ago, should receive vaccine. But now, if studies are saying that the antibody decline but protection lasts, so there is no point of giving booster. But then there is another important point for India. And that is, if we take argument that health workers or frontline workers receive vaccine in January to March or April at a shorter interval. So of course, a long time had passed, but what should additional evidence should have been generated and should be used, whether the kind of second wave which happened in India and which of course would have exposed them to the natural infection, what would have been impact of that natural infection to those vaccinated?
Well, actually, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there because that is being cited by some experts as one of the reasons for us not needing boosters, that at least an estimated 70% of India, I do not know how the serological surveys have been aggregated to this level, but this is what the media reports, that 70% of India is already exposed. This is exactly what we heard after the first wave, when we believed that there was enough exposure. So Chandrakant, hold that thought. There's a lot to unpack there. Brian, before I come to you, some data to share with our audience is this, that over 7 crore Indians did not show up for their second dose. We need to also look at these numbers, the complacency that is setting in as cases fall to a multi-month low. I have always been in favor of vaccine mandates because I believe that as things look less bad, the human tendency is to not show up for both of those jabs. So on the one hand, you actually have people who are entitled to their second shot and aren't showing up for them. And then we are saying that till everybody is fully vaccinated, we can't even consider boosters. But if people are opting out of getting their second dose, why should frontline workers pay the price by not getting a booster that is their entitlement now? Brian, go ahead.
Thanks, Barkha. That's there's a lot packed into that question. When we think about all vaccines, many vaccines require booster doses. That this vaccine or that these vaccines may, in the end, require a booster would not be at all unique. When that time comes, when there's evidence to support the fact that boosters may be required for these vaccines in particular, and in an Indian context, the obvious priority at that time should be for high-risk individuals of older age, those with comorbidities that put them at higher risk of severe outcomes associated with COVID, and as you stated, individuals on the front line, health workers, and so on and so forth. Until that time, and I was looking forward to the second half of the discussion today, where we're talking about ethics and inequities in access to vaccines. I think when we get into questions of mandate, when we get into questions of supply and demand, obviously how we use the existing supplies, there's a lot of ethical implications.
And again, I don't mean to undermine that, but the ethical dimension also is that without vaccine mandates, if people, I'm being told that the updated figure now is that 12 crore Indians are due for their second shot. This is not a supply problem anymore. Private hospitals in the city where Rajesh is sitting, Mumbai, lakhs of doses are approaching their expiry date. So when we talk about the ethics, of first going around the entire population, the differential pricing, the differential allotment, the private hospitals experiment with vaccines has not necessarily worked out the way we had imagined. It's not the same as the testing experiment went, Brian. So there is this thing of wasting vaccines. These vaccines are approaching their expiry date.
Absolutely. And so when you have vaccines that are potentially going to waste, when we're sitting on a stockpile of vaccines, there are a couple of different ways in which you can use those vaccines. One would be to make sure, and this is what I would prioritize, make sure that those individuals who've only received one dose or who have received no doses, that they are prioritized for the available vaccines. The next priority I would consider would be countries where far fewer individuals have had even a single dose of the vaccine. And we have to remember that this is a global pandemic and that we need to be thinking about it in terms of global access to immunization. The last point, which I would begin to prioritize, would be individuals at at super high risk of adverse outcomes associated with infection, and making sure that they are boosted. But those would come second, or third rather, to making sure that individuals get their first dose, complete their primary course, and countries where other doses are needed, maybe more so.
Well, then, Dr. Vineeta, is the answer vaccine mandates? Because there's something criminal about the fact that, we will not do boosters. One, because science is divided on whether it is needed at this point for the kind of vaccines that India has administered. And on the other hand, you have people who are not showing up for their second shot. You have lakhs of vaccines going to waste in private hospitals.
Yes, I mean, I know we are now moving towards the public health aspect of it. But before that, I wanted to make 2 points on science, which I did not make earlier. One is, all of us tend to assume that presence of antibodies is an indication of immune response and waning immunity and so on and so forth. And there is a component called T-cell immunity, which doesn't get investigated very regularly for a variety of technical reasons. And that is also what is showing persistence with adeno-based vaccines. So that was a point that I did not
and
make.
we have the study you were referencing up earlier, the New England study.
Correct.
If you want to, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So this is the study which has shown 3, 4, 5 small. I mean, numbers are small. So I would not say this is generalizable, but on even our sero surveys are of small nature. So all of that is a sampling strategy that we need to think about, and that is why I refer to this survey or this letter, and it is showing that the T-cell immunity, CD8 T-cell immunity, which are the killer T-cells, virus infected cells get killed, killer T-cell immunity with adeno-based vaccine seems to be lasting really, really long time as compared to both mRNA vaccines.
Can I, before you get into the public health dimension, Dr. Rajesh Parikh, do you want to come in there? Because for every
I
study,
also wanted to make one more point, if I could. So this was about T-cell immunity. The other point was, again, the vaccines and the boosters which are available today, all of them are not transmission blocking vaccinations. They are all injections. They are not going to block transmission.
This is the oldest debate that we have never resolved. That's why I'm smiling, because on this program for 2 years, we are unable to agree on whether vaccines have any impact on transmissibility. And I know your position, and I'm glad to hear it again. And I also know that there are counter positions to it. But on the first point, I just want to take that to Dr. Parikh. Vineeta quotes from the New England Journal. We have the Harvard Israel sort of study that points us in a different direction. Vineeta would say it's apples to oranges because it isn't the same sort of vaccines. There hasn't been enough work done on the virus vaccines, which is what Indians have been getting. Rajesh, your response. Sorry, you're on mute.
Fascinating discussion.
Yeah, now go ahead.
Yes, I mean, this is a fascinating discussion. Other than watching Vineeta smile so graciously at all of us, I agree with all the data points that she's raising. I mean, in an unusual situation where I'm spot on with what she's saying, but at considerable variance with the conclusions that she draws from the same data points. And that, I guess, is the nature of science. To get to basics, Barkha, all vaccines other than the live attenuated vaccines need boosters. The live attenuated vaccines, which people received in their childhood, whether it was smallpox or whatever else, those confer really long-lasting immunity and not requiring boosters. Almost all other vaccines, which are derived in the various platforms, at least that are prevalent today, all of them need boosters. So for someone to say that, well, I need to now wait and see whether this particular vaccine needs a booster, tantamounts to tautology. We're just going around in circles. There's enough evidence to suggest throughout history. I mean, vaccines have been around for 200 years, mind you. And over 200 years, we've learned a few things. And that is one very simple thing, that other than these live attenuated vaccines, all vaccines are going to need boosters. That these vaccines need boosters, I don't think we need to wait for further evidence to decide on that. The equity question, I think you've already raised it. I think the moral question is, should we throw these in the dustbin, Or should we wait for evidence to gather before deciding that we don't want to put them in the dustbin and give them to humans? And aside from the New England Journal, may I just cite a Nobel laureate, Bob Dylan, who didn't publish this. He sang it, but he did ask an important question years and years ago in the 60s. And he says, how many deaths will it take till we know that too many people have died? A lot of people have died. Okay. Yes. And all along, a lot of us have been in denial. And, I can almost predict, we have two eminent epidemiologists here, and I am in tremendous respect of the great work, not just they, but epidemiologists in general have done. I think that's not been appreciated adequately. The models have been incredible by and large. And if I may just present a naive amateur model of mine of what I expect to happen based on past behavior. At the end of the day, most models are predicated on what has happened in the past. And, over these last 2 years, I've seen an interesting shift in positions with the ICMR, with many scientific bodies. It's almost become like a shuffle. You had the Macarena, and then you had the ketchup dance. And I don't know, you had that other thing, whatever it's called, where people are jumping in and out of moving vehicles. And now here seems to be an interesting shuffle, if I may call it the ICMR shuffle. It's one step to the right, one step to the left, 2 steps behind, turn around, put your hands up in the air, and say, we knew this all along. So let's see in everything that has happened, and that's going to happen with boosters, mind you. We don't need testing. 1 step to the right, 1 step behind. The evidence is not there. Why should we test? Step to the left. That, okay, maybe we should look at testing. Now you spin around, put your hands up in the air and scream.
I hear you.
We want testing all along.
I hear you, and I'll let Vineeta complete her point, and then I'll take it back to the epidemiologist. I hear you, and I think there is some merit in learning from prior mistakes, Vineeta, and maybe it would be different if we had vaccine mandates and we were ordering people into their second doses. But again, we're such a huge, gigantic country. We don't have one centralized health system. It's tougher for us to implement these things than it is for the Western world, and even they haven't imposed vaccine mandates. Go ahead, Vineeta. You're on mute.
Vaccines going waste is really a colossal waste. And on multiple fronts, government of India has not been good about decisions, implementations, and so on throughout this pandemic. So this giving so many doses or selling so many doses to private sector was a mistake. That is what I would like to say. But if they are going waste, even, if private hospitals can afford it, and this is a question that even Jaslok Hospital may be wanting to respond to, but they should give it free. No vaccine should go waste is something that I completely agree. And I also agree that at some point the prioritization for a second booster or a third shot in Indian case will have to be decided. It's not something that I'm saying we will never need it. I'm talking about whether we should mandate third shot today, or whether we should actually insist, and whether it's making compulsion or not. In a democratic country, I do not like to do this kind of coercion and mandating, but that's the only reason why I'm not saying it should be mandated, it should be compulsory. But personally, I feel everybody who is eligible should take it, should get it, in whichever way we need to reach out. So okay, that I am not denying at all. And I'm also not saying that third dose or second booster will not be needed ever. But we need to think about what is it that we want to achieve with the second booster.
Okay, let me bring in Chandrakant. Chandrakant, I think you were trying to make this point that has only been referred to about the difference between antibodies and T-cell immunity. And to put it very simply, basically, if we get obsessed with at which stage antibodies fall, that will not necessarily explain to us whether the vaccines are still holding up against hospitalizations and deaths. This is, I'm paraphrasing you very simply, probably in layperson's language. Help me here. Are you saying that even if a third shot is not given, the original purpose of the vaccine, which was never to prevent the cases, but to prevent the ICUs and the deaths, will still hold even without the booster? Chandrakant?
Yes, that's what I'm saying, that with the 2 shots primary immunization schedule, people are protected from the original intended purpose of vaccination. And that's why we should continue with offering first shot to those who have not started, and second shot to those who have started on the vaccination. That should be the purpose. And once we reach 70% or 80% of fully immunization coverage, then we can take a call. But that's not the only point. If there is additional evidence emerge on various aspects of vaccines, that these vaccines have an additional advantage or other evidence, then we should use evidence. But I want to go back to another discussion which was happening, that the vaccines are being wasted. I personally think that in current scenario, it is a little bit of exaggeration to say that vaccines are being wasted, because India has something like 20 crore shots available. But we should be mindful that there are 12 crore people who are eligible. And if they turn up tomorrow, we wish so, then we don't have that kind of extra shots available. So we have a realistic supply. But I also want to make a point that starting mid-October, we
But
know
obviously there's a class differential in who's getting and not getting that second shot, Chandrakant. That's why the private hospitals have the excess numbers. There's a class differential here.
It's not class difference, because this vaccine should be free, and then if people have to pay for the vaccine, then they are choosing not to go to the private sector facility. That's the reality of India. Everybody who could have afforded has already taken the vaccine. Actually, this 43% of people who are fully vaccinated could be the same group of people who are adhering to all the COVID appropriate behaviors and who believe that COVID is a serious challenge. So we should be focusing actually on those who have received only one shot or not received, because they are the one who might be at a higher risk. Not
and
the
how
one
do you do that without mandates? I'm returning again and again to mandates. And when I say mandates, do we need, and I just want this for you and Brian, do you need something like the Aadhaar program, where it's never specifically declared as compulsory, but it's linked to so many parts of your life that you have no option? Most Indians today want an Aadhaar because it's linked to so many parts of their lives. Should we at least be saying you can't get into a restaurant till you have 2 vaccines, vaccine passports, if not vaccine mandates? I mean domestically, not just for international travel, vaccine passports in an everyday sense. Chandrakant, quickly, and then Brian. Yeah.
So I have already written and spoken about it, that considering these vaccines provide individual protection and they do not provide larger public benefit because they do not reduce transmission. So individuals should make a choice not whether they want to get vaccinated or not vaccinated. Yes, what government should do this in this scenario, that they should make easily accessible, they should do campaign, but I am definitely against any kind of mandate, especially these vaccines do not provide the kind of benefit which could have been a case for mandatory vaccines.
So let me take that to Brian. I know you think that they provide individual protection, but this is strictly not true, because if there are more people in a population vaccinated, then whether or not it reduces transmissibility, it will. The more vaccinated a population is, the fewer the chances of deaths and ICU hospitalizations. And therefore, the fewer the chances of a lockdown or other restrictions on economic activity, which is a public interest issue and not about individual protection. It concerns us all if the world doesn't get back on its feet. Brian, is the answer then, if we are not going to do booster doses, to have vaccine mandates?
So first of all, I want to clarify one piece. Chandrakant and I have gone back and forth on this quite a bit about the vaccines preventing transmission. The caveat and the nuance here is that the vaccines do provide, not 100%, but they do provide protection from infection. And when you provide protection from infection, you thereby prevent onward transmission. And so it's an important thing to point to remember that having high levels of vaccine coverage, it doesn't eliminate transmission, because you can still have breakthrough cases. But in individuals who have been vaccinated, we do know that they do have protection from infection itself. And so there is a disruption of transmission that comes with that. Barkha, to your question on vaccine mandates. Vaccine mandates are not straightforward. I think given where we are currently in the pandemic, I have been in favor of targeted mandates, mandates in cases where, for example, in certain workplaces, for certain activities, I think vaccine mandates could have a lot of power. Would I prefer to not have to implement a mandate? Of course, we should all have, maintain our own.
But that's not what's happening, right? We can keep saying this, but not enough people are voluntarily going to get their second shot. Even in India, we are at a completely different place. I need to take last comments. Rajesh, I'll start with you. We're at a completely different place that we were from the beginning of 2021, when people were desperate for a vaccine and there were no vaccines to be had. We are not at that place right now. I take Chandrakant's point that our supply is realistic and not surplus. But in relation to the number of people who are now showing up to get that vaccine, in that way, it seems to be surplus, not vis-a-vis how many people need to get vaccinated. So what's the answer? Dr. Parikh.
Well, absolutely. First of all, Barkha, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the difference between a booster shot and a third shot. If I may paraphrase Shakespeare from Romeo and Juliet, a booster by any other name is still a booster. So I won't be astonished if 2-3 weeks from now, the ICMR says, well, a third shot may be advisable. So they're not actually retreating. And that's what I meant by the dance where you turn around, spin around, put your hands up and say, well, we are not still saying that you need booster shots, but it might be okay to get third shots. I won't be surprised at all if that happens. So I think we are going to come around to the reality that booster shots are needed. I think all of us are in consensus with that. The question is when? Today, tomorrow, after we do 80%? I belong to a group which believes that if vaccines are going waste, if we have them in excess, then indeed they should be used as booster shots for those who are eligible for those booster shots. And it's as simple as that. For me, it's not a very complicated or nuanced ethical or scientific question. It's a very practical solution to a problem which is occurring elsewhere in the world. I mean, Germany has vaccinated 70% of its population, and they're facing huge problems there. Other countries are. And so I think the time for boosters is now.
I mean, I'll go back to one of my earlier arguments that maybe the dashboard focusing on the cases is the wrong approach that the world has taken. And Chandrakant does remind us that the original purpose of the vaccines was to stop people landing up in hospitals. But Austria, by the way, is seeing greater spikes in hospitalization in ICUs as well. So this is playing out differently in different countries. Brian, last thoughts?
Absolutely. Some of the studies that have been used to justify the introduction of boosters in the US have been based on epidemiologic studies from places like Israel, which has really been quite ahead of the curve in terms of both getting high levels of vaccine coverage as well as vaccine boosters. And what they have seen is a further reduction after boosters in severe cases and hospitalizations. So there very well could be a need in the near future for boosters based on these epidemiologic studies from other settings. To others' point though, India is different from many of these settings for multiple reasons. One, we do have higher levels of natural infection, which is important to take into consideration, and we are using a different vaccine platform that is being which is being used in Israel. So overall, I think broad-based administration of booster doses it's not the time for that right now in India. It has a risk of exacerbating vaccine inequities. We should be focused on getting second doses up, and if that means potentially looking at mandates, I would be in favor of that.
Okay, let me bring in Chandrakant on this business. These are last comments, but anyone can jump in on this one point on the serological surveys that are suggesting a greater exposure to infection. That's the one part. Should it be part of policy, given that when we tried to make this part of policy ahead of the second wave, we ended up with egg on our face? That's the first question. The second is that even if the three people on this panel, not Rajesh, think this is not the time for boosters, what about the elderly and the frontline workers? Chandrakant, who did get their vaccine much earlier than the rest of the population?
So a few things are like this. One, that the decision on booster dose or any other decision had to be based upon multiple parameters, not only on the scientific or other aspect. Epidemiological, serological evidence, and also evidence on what is the evidence for booster dose benefit operational reality, what time gap should be there between the first primary schedule and booster dose, whether same vaccine should be used for booster or other vaccine should be used. So those are the parameters. So we should not pick just one parameter of antibody. That's the one point. And I think it's perfectly all right that we use epidemiological, serological, all parameters. That's on this part. Second part is related to whether elderly or other groups should be given booster shot. We need to remember that in India, even though vaccination of 60 plus population started on 1st March, only around 55% of 60 plus has received both shots. So if the cases are rising in elderly or 45 plus, it is because they have not been vaccinated with the primary schedule. Just because we are failing in achieving the objective of what we intended to do, we should not jump that let's do booster dose. It will benefit to only those who have already been protected. And there are other measures. So
okay.
I stop.
Vineeta, we'll close with you. Are you convinced about the argument that more Indians have had exposure to the virus, and therefore, again, we tend to believe, looking at these cases that are dropping, that we're better off than the rest of the world? This is exactly what we thought after the first wave.
I did not think of it like that after the first wave. Even today, I have some apprehension, because while there have been many serological surveys which have been done through the country, how representative they are is a question. For example, everybody who is in Delhi, my colleagues in Delhi, keep saying that no, 70%, 80% positivity is what we are observing. But in Pune, in some other areas, that level of positivity is not there. Neither is it there in Kerala, where the cases are continuing. So this is like, pockets where there is very high seropositivity, and in other pockets it is not there, and in other most of India we do not know, because we don't have data. So if this is the situation, how generalized a remark can I make? So I do feel that wherever in pockets, for example in Delhi, if there is a massive positivity which happened after the second wave, then maybe the local Delhiites, I'm not saying people who are in and out of Delhi, but local Delhiites might actually be better protected than some other areas. We are seeing that in Mizoram, the cases are steadily going up. So obviously, I mean, Mizoram is such a small state, we would not call it a wave, but it is going up. It is not even stable or coming down. So there are such focal differences which are there. And hence, I think serological surveys will tell you about the local realities, wherever they have been sampled from. But they are generalizing from them on a national scale is something that we should not be doing. And hence, I think strong surveillance, trying to continue masking, trying to push people for getting boosters. And also, the last point that I want to make is those who are extremely vulnerable, or if we have data that some individuals have not managed to mount enough response despite 2 doses of vaccine, these are the people who could be given these surplus doses. But do we have again data for that? That's where everything, unfortunately, is landing.
Well, as always, those gaps or those black holes, as it were, in our data collection are at the heart of what we should do next. But the jury is still out on this debate around booster doses. As Rajesh said, would we look at it differently if we called it a third shot? Somehow, booster by itself makes it seem like a luxury that is not really needed, like bonus. Rajesh, are you trying to say something? Rajesh? All right. No, I don't think he is. But we leave it there, Chandrakant.
But I just step as an analogy. I mean...
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, go ahead. I wasn't sure if you were trying to say something. Are you trying to say something? Okay, we don't have the best line to use, Rajesh, sorry. So we're just closing there. I was just saying that the nomenclature of booster itself is probably a bit misleading when we look at this debate, but the data gaps prevent us, and of course the equity issues prevent us from reaching a decision that we can all agree on. So I do think it's time that we start talking about something close to vaccine mandates, however uncomfortable it may make democratic cultures. Leaving it there, Dr. Parikh, Dr. Bal, Brian, and Chandrakant. Thank you. And to our audience, see you tomorrow. Goodbye.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.